So yesterday we did the story about the Halden prison in Norway. And, you know, of course this is an unscripted show, right? So we had a spontaneous discussion about the recidivism rate in Norway versus the United States. Now, since it was a spontaneous discussion, we didn't have the numbers with us at that point in time. And I think it's important to go back to the topic and give you guys some of the numbers. Now, a lot of people were unhappy with the way we covered that story, and I agree with them. For instance, I said that the maximum sentence that you receive in Norway is 21 years, which is the truth. However, after that 21 years is served, the person is then reviewed, and if that person is deemed unfit to be released into society, he or she can have that sentence repeated.
In fact, it can be repeated up to 5 times.
Right.
So if they do that with the killer in Norway, well, not likely to get out. Okay, so we'll see though. But you know, it's still, but to be fair, it's still open to question. They might release him after 21 years. His sentence is actually 21 years. So don't get me wrong, I still don't agree with it, but there is that element of nuance that's very important to this story.
Right. So now I want to give you guys some numbers, and these numbers are in regard to Norway versus the United States.
Now, understand that yesterday we showed you this amazing prison complex in Norway that seems like a retreat. That seems like one of our better hotels in the U.S., okay? And I said that I was not in favor of that. I said the recidivism rate, once we find out what it is, might influence my decision. Let's find out if it does.
Okay, so let's start with the graphic. So when it comes to homicides per 100,000 people, Norway has 0.6 intentional homicides per 100,000 people. Now compare that to the US with 5 intentional homicides per 100,000 people.
All right, so that is almost 10 times as high, obviously. They have a lot less murders. Okay, now, remember, that's, you know, not necessarily people who are already in prison, and so you might say, hey, look, the population for other reasons might be a lot less prone to crime, which is a very, very fair point. So how about the people who went out of prison, what happened to them?
Let's talk about the incarceration rate. 71 out of every 100,000 people are incarcerated in Norway. Compare that to the number in the United States. 743 out of every 100,000 people, and that's in 2009 alone.
Okay, see, God, we incarcerate so much more people here in the United States.
Because it's a big business.
Well, look, a lot of our prisons have become privatized, so the more prisoners they have, the more money they make. And by the way, they also contribute to our politicians, who then pass laws to create more prisoners. So it's a terrible cycle that we have in the U.S. And so far, the crime situation and the prison situation in Norway seems startlingly better. But finally, we get to the recidivism issue.
Norway's recidivism rate is 20%. Compare that to the United States with a 50 to 60% recidivism rate. The same goes for the UK, as a side note.
Norway or U.S.?
U.S. U.S. and the UK have the same recidivism rate.
Okay, and to give you some slightly more specific numbers, 67% of America's prisoners are rearrested and 52% are reincarcerated in general, okay? So that recidivism rate in the U.S. is horrible, okay? 20% in Norway is pretty damn good. Having grown up in the U.S. and studied this in the past, meaning just I took some courses in college and I've read all the different articles that come out on it, I was stunned by the 20% number. That is incredibly low. So now, does that make us rethink the luxurious prisons that they have? Well, look, it cuts in a couple of different directions. They already have very low crime. They already incarcerate a lot less people. But that doesn't really go towards what happens after they've been incarcerated, right? So the guy's already been arrested, and you could make a case that since they arrest fewer people, that those guys must really have been guilty, right? It's not like the U.S. where they're just grabbing everybody. Oh, you smoked pot, you're going to jail. You did this. The woman we talked about the other day, jaywalking, you're going to jail, right? So they're very selective about who they put in prison, and even among those people, only 20% come back. Given that, God, that prison and how luxurious it is, I just feel like it's missing a sense of justice. But if the results are that damn good, I gotta say, you can't argue with those facts and you can't argue with those results. I'm going to have to rule in favor of the prison.
I agree, because you have to take the emotional aspect out of it. In the United States, and I think anywhere in the world, we have that emotional aspect where we want to see criminals punished. You know, we want to see them suffer for their crimes. And the prison system shouldn't be like that, even though part of us wants it to be like that. It should be about rehabilitating these people, making them prepared to, you know, integrate back into society as soon as they serve their sentence.
You have the more humane answer, Anna, but I'm not necessarily convinced. I do want punishment, and I think that's part of justice, right? So if somebody, let's say, rapes someone I love, I don't want them sitting there with a flat screen TV and a nice bed and, you know, on their jogging path, etc. I want them punished, right? So look, I'm keeping it real on that front. But on the other hand, you know, there are other factors involved here. And if it means that less people commit crime afterwards, hence less people are raped or killed or mugged, etc., well then I'm going to have to put my vengeance aside a little bit for the good of society, because a 20% recidivism rate is unbelievably good.
I know.
You know, and look, you can say there are other factors, and the prison might only be one of the factors, but it's such a stark difference that you have to think that the prisons seem to have, you know, a large, determinative factor involved.